approaching the oil fields was like Dante's Inferno. It was literally, you entered into a black space.
In the aftermath of the first Gulf War, bomb disposal technician Ben Remfrey was part of a specialist team sent into Kuwait's burning oil fields.
They set charges on all of the wellheads so that you had a detonation which then broke open the wellhead and spewed oil, gas, fire. And I think they did that to about 780 wellheads.
Then one day, as Ben walked back from defusing a device on a wellhead, he noticed something in one of his footprints.
And as I walked back, I looked at one of my footprints and I saw that there was an anti-personnel mine that I'd actually trodden on. We weren't equipped to get me out of there properly. If it would have been heavily mined, some of those guys trying to get in and get me out would have become casualties themselves.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hey folks, and welcome back to another episode of No Ordinary Monday. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm your host, Chris Barron, and each week I invite a guest onto the show to relive their No Ordinary Monday story, an extraordinary event or experience that stands out across their entire career. And like any good story, we'll reveal the path that led them there, we'll hear what the job is really like behind the scenes, and at the end we'll discover the lessons that our guest has learned along the way. Now today's episode takes us into the world of bomb disposal and humanitarian mine action. My guest is Ben Remfrey. Ben is a former British Army engineer and bomb disposal expert who spent decades working some of the most dangerous environments on Earth, clearing unexploded bombs, landmines, and other remnants of war from conflict zones across the planet. Today, he runs one of the world's leading training organizations for explosive ordnance disposal, or EOD. They train and certify new EOD operators from more than 70 countries to safely deal with these threats. But as you heard at the start of this episode, this line of work can also be extremely dangerous. In Ben's case, one of these moments happened in Kuwait shortly after the first Gulf War, when he realized that he had just stepped directly onto an anti-personnel landmine. Quick note, this episode includes some brief discussion of the psychological toll that working in conflict zones can take, including references to alcohol abuse and suicide among veterans and others in this line of work. It's not the main line of focus of this conversation, but if these topics are sensitive for you, just a heads up before we begin. You're listening to No Ordinary Monday. Let's get into the show. Ben, welcome to the podcast. How are you doing today?
Well, I'm fine, Chris. And look, first and foremost, thank you for inviting me on to No Ordinary Monday. And I've followed some of the podcasts and the individuals and the incredible stories that they have to tell, and it's intriguing. And again, thank you.
No, an absolute pleasure. And look, we've already chatted off camera about your story, and I'm really excited to jump into it because I think it's another great one. But I always like to start where people are calling in from today. Where are you at?
At the moment, I'm actually at home in the office in Guernsey, in the Channel Islands.
Okay.
My work takes me obviously to many places, and generally my office and place of work is both in the Maltese Islands and also in Kosovo, where we have our explosive ordnance disposal training establishment.
Fantastic. I was half expecting, if you're calling from your facility in Kosovo, to sort of hear booms in the background from our recording today. Would we hear anything if we were recording at your offices?
You'd hear a lot of people going about their business, and yes, there is the odd sound unit that we use at the school. But when it comes to live demolitions and dealing with explosives and destroying ammunition, we actually do that at a range in Montenegro, where we have an agreement with a demilitarization company that are basically responsible to the UNDP for disposal of aging stockpiles in the region. So that's where we do our demolitions with live ordnance and different techniques.
I wanted to start out because, as you're saying before, we've interviewed a bunch of interesting people on the show before, and particularly with jobs like yours, which kind of stand out as atypical or a bit unusual. I mean, typically when you're meeting people for the first time, what kind of reaction do they have about when you say, "Oh, I'm a bomb disposal expert," or in some sort of explosive remnants of war disposal? What are people's reactions typically?
Well, clearly they're interested and they're intrigued because it's very much out of the normal, isn't it? I guess, I came into this industry. I was a boy soldier. I joined the Royal Engineers. I was involved in doing basic demolitions as a young soldier, and then through and to today, where my career has taken me through many different manifestations of a humanitarian deminer, and also where we are now, where we are the world's specialist organization that trains people to international mine action standards. And the word mine is a generic for all unexploded ordnance in our industry. And it covers the counter IED side. It covers airdrop weapons, guided weapons, land service ammunition, and everything else, and the safe disposal. So people are really interested in what got me into this job, if you like,
Mm,
and also sort of trace my career and some of the interesting and fortunate situations I've been, and unfortunate, but also the
yeah.
incredibly amazing people I get to work with.
I would love to, just for the listeners, to give them a sense of what it's like, what you've done. Obviously we'll go into what you're doing in Kosovo in the training facility, but before that, as a bomb disposal expert or someone in that field, what are the sort of most notable, memorable sort of items? Whether it's IEDs, improvised explosives, or whether large sort of caliber weapons that you've made safe. Can you just run us through some of those different weird and wonderful things that you've rendered safe?
Uh, from things as simple as a hand grenade, something like a mill. You can picture a Mills bomb. The British segmented hand
Mm,
grenade. You pull the pin out, you throw it. Generally, it functions by design after several seconds, and detonates. A lot of the
yeah,
time, though, especially with aging land service ammunition and small arms, that people throw these things and they don't go bang. But it doesn't mean they're not going to go bang. And
yeah.
therefore, you have to deal with something as simple as that in a similar way to the way that you would deal with a large aircraft bomb that's maybe
Mm,
1,000 pounds that's been dropped.
wow.
Again, it hasn't functioned as designed. Why hasn't it functioned? There's an issue with the fusing system. But then the way that you render safe a 1,000 pound bomb is similar to the way that you would render safe a small item like a hand grenade. And there are a number of ways that you can render safe a device, either by destroying the fuse, taking the fuse off remotely, or using what we call a low order technique to deflagrate the item without causing too much collateral damage. But again, it
I
goes
think,
for guided weapons. A guided weapon looks massive, doesn't it? You've
yeah.
got a guidance unit, you've got the warhead, you've got the propulsion unit. Um, so it looks absolutely enormous. But when it comes down to the warhead and the fusing system, it's generally similar to a lot of other ammunition that is guided in terms of how you would also render safe that proximity fuses and the likes.
Do you feel more intimidated defusing, if you're face to face with a hand grenade or a large bomb, or is it kind of the same, the kind of both just as dangerous as the next?
In my personal experience, I guess I feel a little bit more intimidated by the smaller items, cluster
Hmm,
munitions, um, booby traps.
interesting.
Booby traps
Yeah,
is the one thing, when I was, and again, we'll go back to Kuwait, we'll hop around on
yeah.
different countries, but when I was in Kuwait, I always remember hopping into an ammunition storage that was full of 155 millimeter projectiles. And I thought, I just looked around and saw all these boxes, they were full of ammunition. What I'd failed to see was that under one of the boxes, which was slightly elevated on one side, was something as simple as a hand grenade that had been placed in there with the box resting on the fly-off handle. The guy pulled the pin out, So when the
Oh my
box was
God.
lifted up, the fire handle would come off the grenade, and there was actually an instantaneous fuse on a detonator,
Oh God.
which would have then gone off immediately and killed everybody in that confined area. So, when people talk about improvised
Wow.
devices, they're the real scary ones. But
Yeah.
when you're dealing with land service ammunition, um, even up to guided, including airdrop weapons and guided weapons, you know how to deal with these things. The thing when it comes to improvised devices is the item and the situation is as complex as the person that actually laid it and devised it and built the device, because that the technology curve these days as well, people can
Mm,
use PIR switches and other things. Um, and they could put a com on, and there could be a crush wire, or there could be a trip wire, or it could be light activated, with a light panel. So it's very, very complex.
I mean, one of the things that I remember reading about in the research was, and this may not even be the latest technology, but there's these type of anti-personnel mines that I think you drop them from an aircraft, and they're kind of like a spike, and they sit in the ground with a seismic sensor,
Big
and they
time.
can detect between wildlife and military and infantry the way that the pacing and stuff, and then once they detect the right kind of target, that's only when they go off.
That's right. You're right. They hit the ground. They deploy themselves. They flip themselves into an upright position. They fire out tripwires. They have the whole
Oh
seismic
my God.
sensors, so that when an armored vehicle or infantry or even people get close enough, then they do spin and fire exactly at the target.
Yeah.
And yeah, they're very, very difficult to deal with. A lot of the times they do have the sort of lithium battery charge that only lasts for, say, 20, 30 days. But some of them
Yeah.
have light sensitive units that can then repower them up. But yeah, it's a concern, and especially in advanced warfare like we've got in Ukraine.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, like, reading into a little bit of this stuff, what blew me away was, we kind of mentioned a little bit before, when you are an army and you're going to war and on a large scale and you are equipping your combatants with stuff, you're typically not giving them the stuff that's come fresh off the manufacturing line. You're giving them the stuff that might have been in the warehouse for, I don't know, 10 years, 20 years. And, reading that, I think the average fail rate can be about 30% in some of these cases. And so what that you end up with, as you said before, is you end up with you mass deploying a lot of this weaponry, and potentially up to a third of it just sits in the ground, for someone to come across it at the wrong time, possibly, and even likely after the war has ended. And I guess this kind of comes on to what you guys are doing in Kosovo, which is training people all over the world to deal with this problem of contamination. And I guess just maybe start us off with the scale. People might not be aware listening to this how big a problem it is, and then what you guys are doing with the Mine Action Trust in Kosovo.
That, that's a really good point, and it's a fundamental issue. It's ammunition stockpiles and aging ammunition stockpiles. If for viewers and listeners, if you can imagine, you have a massive warehouse and you have big sliding doors at either end, and everything that goes in is palletized on wheels. Okay, every time they have a conflict, a lot of these first world nations or whomever else, is they don't take out the ammunition that's been recently manufactured. Okay, they take out all the stuff that is aging, and they drop that first because they want to get rid of it. Instead of going through an elaborate and expensive process of ammunition stockpile destruction, it's far easier to drop it on somebody else and then pass the problem on somebody else. And you're right. Sometimes there is 100% failure rate in a munition that
Wow.
says has 202 submunitions in it, or it's 20%, or it's 60%. Okay, the estimate in Ukraine at the moment is, from what the Russians have been dropping, 60% failure. But the issue is a lot of these munitions have very sensitive fusing systems, and although they haven't gone bang when they were deployed, there's a high probability if you deal with them in the wrong way, they will function and they will kill you. A lot of our graduates who train with us, they'll go out and they will deal with an item that was fired yesterday that could have been manufactured 70 years ago.
Oh my God.
So, it's
Seriously.
failed to function because
Yeah.
of its age.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah.
And I guess that brings us on to what, take us through what Matt or the Mine Action Trust in Kosovo, you guys' big training facility. I mean, you guys are basically, if not the premier, training facility in the world for this kind of stuff. Is that right?
We are. We're actually, the parent unit is called Pradium Consulting Malta because we set it up when we were working a lot in Libya after the revolution, after they ousted Gaddafi, and we were doing a lot of stuff in the oil and gas side of things and the energy sector. We set up PCM, but a few years prior to that, I had set up MAC Kosovo EOD and ERW training establishment. ERW means Explosive Remnants of War, with an idea that, a lot of people don't have the time to conduct in-house training of their national staff or even increasing the capacity and competence of their own international expatriate staff. So I saw a niche, an area where we could improve the standard of training. And this goes all the way back. I'm going to say Kuwait again. When I went into Kuwait in 1990, 91, 92, we were given equipment. We weren't even given personal protective body armor or anything else. We were given exploders, firing cable, debts and explosives, and we cut around in the oil fields blowing stuff up, literally, not really giving a care to safety and standards. And therefore, we had a 10 to 15% casualty rate. And a lot of the time that was just down to people doing things that weren't advisable. I mean,
Smart.
and complacency. When you're doing a job, any job, Chris, for 18 months, you start cutting corners, you start taking risks, and that's when people get killed. That's when people get injured. With a ruggedized standard, as we do now have with the international mine action standards, that hardly ever happens. If there's an incident, then it's down to operator negligence or it's down to failure of the equipment they're using rather than the process that they use. So that international standard is very important. And that's why we set the school up initially with an idea of doing a little bit of training within Kosovo itself for some of the organizations and more regionally. But now we have a training establishment that has clients from over 70 different countries. We have all of the equipment you could imagine that you would need, from free from explosive training aids to ground probing radar, digital geophysical mapping systems, every EOD tool and weapon you can think of. We have all of that there at our disposal. But we also deploy cadres to different countries. We've deployed cadres to Libya, to Syria, to Ukraine, to many different countries to deliver what it is we do. And you're right, we are recognized as the world's number one or premier IMAS compliant training establishment in the civilian sector when we cover the humanitarian side and also the commercial side. But increasingly, we're training a lot of military and police as well.
And you say, as I said, you've got a big staff there now, and there are so many different kinds of ordnance out there. I mean, do you have to be like, have an encyclopedic sort of memory to sort of understand? I mean, I guess it kind of comes down to countries, because typical countries will be contaminated by different things. But your sort of staff's knowledge base must be having to know the difference between like an Italian-made mine or something made in Africa or China or India or wherever it might be. It must be huge.
Yes, you're right. Do I know them all? Absolutely not. I couldn't even scratch the surface of it. And And the reason that we know what we're doing is because we have subject matter experts within the organization who are bang up to date on a lot of the munitions. But as I said earlier in this interview, in this podcast, every day's a school day. You're always learning. And, when we're teaching, it's always open book. When people are doing exams, it's always open book. We're not expecting people to remember everything. Every group that we've had through our training, there are WhatsApp groups. So when they go operational on the ground and they see something, or they encounter something they're unfamiliar with, they're encouraged to reach out to the group and say, look,
Wow.
I've not dealt with this before. It's something I'm concerned about. Does anybody have any information on it? And within seconds, with the beauty of technology these days,
Yeah.
they can positively ID it through one of their contacts, and then they can deal with it safely.
That's really cool.
And that's what we encourage, Chris. That
Yeah.
there are no experts. We're always learning, and there is always something new.
Absolutely. Now on this podcast, as you've listened to a few other episodes, we always like the guests to come on and sort of recount and relive sort of one of the most extraordinary experiences of their career. Now, we talked a little bit about Kuwait and this story, and I know it takes place there, but I wonder if you sort of wouldn't mind just setting the scene for us, in Kuwait, what it was there a little bit, what it smelt like, what it was like, working in that environment, and then take us into the story.
Well, Kuwait, look, after the first Gulf War, was one of the warmest, brightest countries on the planet. Obviously, desert, relied on minerals, relied on oil and gas, and the withdrawing Iraqi forces, they destroyed as much as they possibly could, whether it had been infrastructure. And in particular, they wanted to destroy the ability of the Kuwait Oil Company of producing oil and gas. So they set charges on all of the wellheads in the oil fields, and they fired them, so that you had a detonation which then broke open the wellhead and spewed oil, gas, fire, and everything else around the desert. And I think they did that to about 780 wellheads.
Wow.
And our job, and literally, you can imagine with prevailing winds, approaching the oil fields was like Dante's Inferno. It was literally, you entered into a black space that was lit here and there by some of the wells that were flaring up, because they were oil and gas. So they were spewing oil, then they were gas, then they were igniting, then they were going out, and you had this process going on for months and months and months. So you had oil and sand stuck to everything. You had oil all over yourself every time you entered into the area. But our job was to go in as a small team of 5 guys, and there were about, I suppose, 20 teams. And we would be given a task dossier to go and deal with a well that was alight, or that was spewing oil, and we'd have to clear from a known safe route, the main supply route, the road. We'd have to do a 50-meter wide lane into the well, 500 meters around the well, clear it, mark it, and then hand it over to the firefighting team, who would then come in, dig a lagoon, fill it with water, use the water to fight the fire if it was flaming, and then they'd cap the well, and then we'd move on to the next one.
How long did that take?
One
roughly?
incident that I had, I suppose, that lives long in my memory, because it's something that happened to me, is that one day we came across a well that wasn't alight and it wasn't spewing oil. So I got my binoculars out and I looked, and I could see that it was undamaged, but I could see that there was something set up like a demolitions charge. So I said to my guys, stay where you are. And I then approached the well on my own, walking quite steadily, directly towards the wellhead.
Was there a
And
known safe route at this point, or had that been
I
identified
was
yet?
off the safe route, so I was walking
Yeah.
across the sandy, oily surface. So
Yeah.
you could literally, I was getting taller as I approached because of
Yeah.
all the other burning wells around and all of the oil and gas, oil and sand. So I got to the well. I dealt with it. So I took the detonators out, the explosive charges, made it safe. And when I was walking back out to my team, I could see all of my footsteps. So I was retracing my footsteps as you do. And there wasn't a known mine threat in that area.
Mm.
And as I walked back, I looked at one of my footprints and I saw that there was an anti-personnel mine that I'd actually trodden on. I'd actually trodden on this mine. It's an
Oh my
Italian
God.
DS-50
That that's the
anti-personnel.
actual mine,
That is the
not a
mine I
mock-up. That.
trod on. And
Oh
I
my
flipped the
God.
mine over and I saw that the guy that had laid it had not put the detonator in it. He'd
Oh
not put the
my
fuse in
God.
it. So I'd
Is that?
actually activated it. So I
Oh
picked it
my
up.
God.
I picked it up. I removed the explosive from it and I put it in my pocket. And one day that will be a doorbell on my forever home. Put it that way. Um, I was very
Oh
lucky.
my God.
There are lots of guys in my industry, and a couple of guys that actually worked for me that have lost limbs because they'd stepped on or they'd been seriously injured by unexploded ordnance. So look, that reminds me of a time I was lucky. I could
Oh my
now
God.
not
Yeah.
have the lower half of my right leg and would have lived with that for 30 odd years now, 37 years. But as it so happens, look, I was lucky. I was fortunate. Um, I never take anything for granted now, though, Chris. If somebody says there's no mixed threat in an area, there's only airdrop munitions, always expect something else. Always be aware and don't take anything for granted. And that was one of those situations, I guess, in life where it didn't really affect me until later on that I could have
Yeah.
been a casualty when we started losing people from some of those teams that we had in Kuwait. Then, it was, but for the grace of God, go I, literally.
You, you sound so casual about it. I know you're very sort of, sound like a layback kind of guy, but the fact that you're walking back and you look inside your footprint to see an anti-personnel mine and then confirm that you had actually previously triggered the mechanism, what went through your mind at that particular? Did you just kind of pick it up and go, "Oh, that was lucky," and go about your day, or did it sort of take a bit of time to sit with you, and then maybe that night or in the following days, it really sort of came to light in your head what how lucky you had been?
The first thing that came to mind was report and record and make sure that
Yeah,
we clear whatever else is in that area because somebody was going to go back and check
yeah,
that wellhead and it just so happens that once we'd done a full survey of the area, there wasn't one other item there. It was just bizarre. So I guess it's like, how could I have stepped on the only item within thousands of square meters of that well when
yeah.
there was so much contamination in the rest of the oil fields? And I guess it was not a divine moment. You can't call it that, but maybe I was spared. Maybe I don't know. And you're right. I sort of sat on the beach in Kuwait where we used to live. It was the first area we cleared when we got to Kuwait was where we could actually subsist and exist. And it dawned on me that I was a very lucky fellow indeed.
Absolutely incredible. And you must have gone over this, so many times in your mind, but do you speculate? Was it incompetence? Did the guy forget? Did he not know what he was doing? Did it drop out of someone's pocket? Like, what was it doing there? What do you think?
I just couldn't comprehend it. Why would he lay one mine, and why would he not put a fuse or a detonator in the mine? Uh, I just can't fathom it. It would have definitely been the guy that had set the demolition, but the demolition didn't go off either.
Mm.
So I think, a certain degree of incompetence of that individual was my lucky day, really.
God.
Yeah. Maybe he was having a Friday moment. I don't know. But anyway, yeah,
Yeah. Oh
lucky
my
man
God,
indeed. Lucky.
that is well, yeah. I can't even imagine. Because as you said, a lot of the other places where I've come across mines being laid is there are, I just visualized if it had gone off, your colleagues would have obviously seen what had happened to you, and they would have had to assume that it was a live minefield, and
Absolutely.
would have had to
Yeah.
go to great pains to
Yeah.
recover you
Yeah.
because they can't just go running in to, so what would have happened in that situation? They would
We
have had to
weren't
take them.
equipped. We weren't equipped to get
Really,
me out of there properly.
you would have to drag yourself out. Do you think?
The guys would have manually tried to clear the ground with their knives and whatever else. We didn't have detectors. We didn't have locators. We didn't have body
Oh my
armor.
God.
These were
Yeah.
the days before there was any proper standards in the industry that there are now. There wasn't even a proper procedure for casualty evacuation out of a known mined area. So, if it would have been heavily mined, some of those guys trying to get in and get me out would have become casualties themselves. This is all trained. So, all of this is in the training these days, and everybody knows
Yeah.
how to conduct a casualty evacuation from a minefield. Back in the day, there was no real idea apart from manually looking, using your Mark 1 eyeball and prodding the ground at 30 degrees with a knife to try and find the other mines, and clearing a route up to the casualty. Generally,
Yeah.
I wouldn't have bled to death. When you step on a AP mine, it generally takes the front of your foot off and cauterizes it as well with a blast. So you're not going to bleed to death. You're going to be there for a wee while. Therefore, people need to take their time and do things properly when they come to evacuate you from the area.
God, it's unimaginable what some of these victims go through. And again, a lot of victims of AP mines are civilians. They're not trained personnel.
Absolutely.
But hold that mine up again for me because I wasn't sure because on the doc I did, is that a plastic one? So it's even hard to detect with the metal detector.
Yeah, it's rubber, pressure pad, and the rest of the mine is plastic. Unscrews. Obviously, I'm handling a free from explosive item,
Yeah,
and then you've got everything inside in terms of,
yeah.
if you look at there, then you have,
Oh wow, it's all plastic.
and
Yeah,
you've got the firing
there's a
pin.
little.
And the firing pin is literally the only metallic part of that mine. So it's very,
Yeah,
very hard to detect, even with a minimum metal detector. Okay, there's
yeah,
no such thing as a mine detector. It's a minimum it's a metal detector that's been optimized to find minimum metal within
yeah,
anti-personnel devices. These days, you
yeah.
do have GPR as well, ground probing radar, so you can sweep the ground and it will find the shape even if it's non-metallic, because some mines do have chemical
Unbelievable.
fuses rather than metal.
And for anyone listening just on the audio version of this, I'll put the pictures and the image of Ben walking us through that on the website and the socials, so you can have a look as well. But unbelievable story. And I guess just sort of going out a little bit more big picture, the career that you've had, you've seen and done some pretty tough stuff across your career. What kind of personal toll does those experiences have on you? Is it been tough, or is it how do you manage this kind of stuff personally?
I'm in my 63rd year, Chris. I've been fortunate to get to 63, considering, I've been a soldier and I've been involved in this industry for many years, and I hold myself lucky that, that I'm still in one piece, physically.
Mm.
Mentally, it does take its toll on you, I suppose, in periods of your life. Um, when I was younger, when I was in Kuwait, I was a single man. I really didn't have to care about a family. Um, I had to be mindful about my parents who were alive at the time, and not
Mm.
causing them any stress, and making sure that they knew everything was fine. And when sometimes it wasn't, you're putting yourself in harm's way regularly. You don't, a lot of people don't like to talk about their experiences. You just have to hear testimonies from the First and Second World Wars, and incredible individuals who had done unimaginable things and never wanted to talk about it after conflict.
Yeah.
In our industry, it's very much an unspoken thing that, we've all seen stuff that's happened. We've all been involved. We've all been deeply affected at one time or another. Some guys, some guys take the obvious routes. Some guys drink, some guys actually commit
Yeah.
suicide. Um, and again, I guess it comes down to their own personal circumstances and how deeply affected they have been. Um, I know that my first marriage was affected ultimately by what I'd been through prior to getting married, prior to having my
Wow.
two sons in my first marriage. I turned to drink. I had
Yeah.
a drinking problem, um, and it was devastating in terms of how it affected my family at the time. And I managed to sort
Yeah.
myself out, but not before my marriage broke down and the family unit split apart. I'm very lucky now that my two sons from my first marriage actually work for me,
Yeah.
and that I'm able to give something back. But I wasn't a very good father first time round,
Mm.
Chris, and I regret that. I'm fortunate enough to have had a second chance. I have a lovely wife. I have two young children who I'm very much more involved with. Um, and look, I'm not at the sharp end anymore. I fly in a plane as a passenger, or I fly a desk as the head of the organization. I don't even do any
Yeah.
demolitions anymore. I don't go anywhere near it. I'll go to the range and watch my staff and students dealing with and dealing with things. I'll go to Ukraine, and I'll see these amazing people from the police, from the military, from the rescue services, from NGOs. I see all of them dealing with items from afar,
Mm.
um, and that's what I used to do in a previous life almost.
Yeah.
Um, I'm not deeply affected. I don't suffer from PTSD. I don't like loud bangs. Anytime I
Yeah.
hear a loud bang, it pisses me off or it upsets me. And people say, well, you deal with exploded. Yeah, but if you hear a loud bang, probably you're not doing things properly, are you? So
Yeah.
there are the odd thing that will set me off. And I've had to experience people that I knew very well and respected being killed. Um,
Yeah.
and it's just part and parcel of what it is we do in the industry. To release land back to communities takes a lot of effort and a lot of sacrifice. And unfortunately, sometimes it's the ultimate sacrifice. Obviously, as a soldier, obviously working in war
Yeah.
zones, you do see this thing go on, and you are exposed to a threat, whether it be driving down the road, or whether it be on site. People do target you, and unfortunately, these days, when you're dealing, you've got to think about what's going on in Ukraine at the moment, because
Yeah.
generally, when we train people to deal with things within our industry, whether it's mine clearance, bomb disposal, they're doing it in a safe environment. Nobody's trying to kill you. Okay. So it's a
Yeah.
permissive environment. What's
Yep.
happening in Ukraine is we're training guys and girls who are going back to Ukraine. And while they're trying to deal with the items, people are trying to kill them. It's a non-permissive environment because the war's ongoing. And I really do feel for those people, those Ukrainians who are incredibly brave, versatile people who have a wonderful sense of humor and a sense of what's
Yeah.
right and what's wrong. But the millions of people are subject to the most unbelievable conditions in Ukraine at the moment. As you and I are sat here now chatting,
Yeah.
people are dying trying to deal with an aggressive invader of their country. And so in an area in Ukraine the size of Syria
Yep.
is suspected of being contaminated by unexploded ordnance. But the
30% of the
overlay,
country.
the overlay of, even if it was a minefield once, it now has cluster munitions in it. It now has
Yeah.
land service ammunition stockpiles dumped in it. The
Yeah.
amount of work that's going to have to be done in Ukraine to release the land back to the communities. And let's not forget the agricultural side. It was and still is, a very incredibly
It's a
important
breadbasket.
resource for supply of oil and grain and other things.
And I think, going back to, it's not the first time this has happened to a country. You go to somewhere like Laos, a country that was heavily, I think the most, possibly until the Ukraine, the most bombed country in history during the Vietnam War. And, estimates range wildly for how long it's going to take to decontaminate that entire country. But some estimates are over 1,000 years at the current rate. And that's obviously due to Laos being, impoverished and everything else that comes with it. But, what, in your mind, what is the solution? You're part of the solution, I guess, is, you're training people to help them clean this stuff up. But do you feel like you're fighting a losing battle, or you're just doing your part, or how do you feel about the whole thing?
Look, there is no silver bullet, Chris. There is no easy solution. There are ways of speeding up the way that we can release land. There is a toolbox for the way that we deal with things, and it includes manual, it includes mechanical, it includes K9, and it includes well-trained people with equipment doing the job. Bees, expanding foam, watercress, all these weird and wonderful ideas, they're not really going to help.
Yeah.
Good, well-trained people with the right equipment, well managed, doing things to international standards and releasing that land thereafter, that is the key.
And I guess that takes us on to sort of, I guess my final sort of question is that for anyone listening that does want to sort of follow in your footsteps or do, get into this kind of line of work, what kind of practical advice have you got for them in terms of getting into it?
I think you make decisions in life. Every individual makes a decision in life, whether they want to do something meaningful for themselves, or whether they want to do something for the community, whether they want to do something for their family, whether they want to follow in the footsteps of their father or mother. What's incredibly important is that all society is involved in every aspect of what makes us all tick and what makes us better people, I guess. There is no end of stories of the type of people that we have applying for our paper seat EOD courses, from the foundation course to the intermediate to the advanced and then the specialities. Because what people learn through to deal with us is fundamentally the first stage is dealing with conventional munitions disposal, all right, landmines, land service ammunition, hand grenades that have been abandoned, projectiles, mortars that have been fired and have failed to go bang. That's conventional munitions disposal. And we train people up to the advanced levels of that to deal with guided weapons, airdrop weapons.
Wow.
And then you go on to the specialities like counter IED, high threat,
Yeah.
ammunition stockpile management, and those aspects. We like to have people involved in the industry who don't just come from a military background.
Hmm.
We've had tooling engineers from Boeing. We've had accountants, lawyers, atomic engineers, all sorts of people from all walks of life have
Even had
re-rolled and come through the school and done our courses and have gone on to have standout careers being country directors for the UN or for clearance companies, for NGOs and the likes. You know, our alumni now, after years of being a training organization, covers the entire globe.
I was going to say, you even had, it's a very important point that you don't need a military background to do this line of work. And you've had even from Ukraine women that were, hairdressers and legal people in law and all kinds of different places. And everyone's coming to do it with a variety of skill sets as well, and I guess you don't need to have a degree necessarily even. Is that right?
It is, and you've hit on a very good point there, and something that's very close to my heart. You know, I do have a heart, and the fact is, even before the full-scale invasion of February 2022, we were involved in Ukraine in an advisory way, and we started to do some training. After the full-scale invasion, I got in touch with the Ukrainian authorities and said, give me a lot of your people. We will find donors. We will take them to Kosovo. We will train them to do conventional munitions disposal, and then we'll send them back. So you can start clearing and dealing with the problems, some of the areas that have been liberated by the Ukrainians. And they said, no, we cannot give you any men of fighting age. There's a presidential decree, and it dictates that no men of fighting age are to leave Ukraine during this time of emergency. So I said, give me your women then. And they said, no way, because women aren't allowed to be sappers in Ukraine. Women are not allowed to be EOD operators in Ukraine. And I said, why? And they said, well, that's always been the way. And I said, well, you've been invaded. Your men are fighting. Your women will do a great job if they're allowed to do this job. And they said, okay, we'll give you an initial 8 ladies, and then let's see how things go. So we took this group of women who we now refer to as a Great 8. And you're right, one was a fashion designer, one was a kindergarten teacher, one was a midwife, one was a housewife.
Yeah.
And we took those 8 ladies, and over 6 weeks, we trained them in the basic level, and they went back, and they've all gone on to be absolutely standout stars within the Ukrainian mine action program. All of them have been back and gone all the way through the levels to advanced levels. They're now running operations. Hundreds of women have now been through the school and have gone back to Ukraine, and women are now very much the future of mine clearance and bomb disposal in Ukraine. And if I'm asked, I suppose at the end of my working life, and somebody were to ask me, what do you think was the best thing that you achieved in your life, in your career? And I will say, hand on heart, training and getting women to be recognized as sappers in Ukraine. And that is the one thing that I'm very, very proud of. I've had MBEs. I've been made a Paul Harris Fellow. The greatest thing and the greatest reward in my life is the fact that I've made women very much part of what it is that we hope to achieve in Ukraine for now and for the future.
That's absolutely fantastic. And I think the irony of that story is that, they said, no, you can't have the men because they're all fighting, and you can't have the women because we don't do that. I think the irony is, and I found this as well when I was making the doc, is that the women actually make incredibly good operators.
Fantastic. Look, women think a little bit more. Men have got testosterone, they've got peer pressure, they've got a number of things going on. I think there's a lot of women that will tell you all men have got something on the spectrum. They're probably right, but with women, they think a lot more about their actions and the consequences of their actions, and I think that comes down to being an operator and dealing with land that eventually you're going to be responsible for anybody that goes on that land thereafter, whether it's your grandchildren or somebody else's. And I think that's why women are so good at what they do.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, Ben, it's been absolutely wonderful having a chat with you today, and this conversation's been so interesting. At the end, I always love people to sort of give the audience, plug what you've been doing. You said a little bit about your website and what you guys are doing, but in terms of where people can find you, socials, or any other sort of work in media that you want people to go and have a look at.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, these days you go on social media, you put in Ben Remfrey or you put in PCM or Matt Kosovo, you're always going to find a lot of stuff on what we do from our website, from our Facebook page, from Twitter and everything else. I've got a great marketing team. You can watch the film actually. And Chris, you mentioned our new marketing film, which is all about what we do and how we do it. And I'm always happy to answer questions where, I'm always accessible to everybody that we've trained and anybody that wants to come into the industry and do something a bit different, whether it's risk education, whether it's administration, whether it's support of training or support of national programs, whether it's donating some funds to one of the charitable organizations. I'm always happy to give advice. I've had a great life. I've had a great career. And I've been incredibly fortunate to work with some of the most incredible people you could imagine from many, many different nationalities, religions, or everything else. And what we always say at our training establishment is the moment you walk through the door, we're all the same. We've all got the same aims and objectives of doing the right thing. Politics has no place. We all have to work together and try and make the world a safer place. And I hope that we as an organization, with the incredible people I have working with me, is that we've made the world a better place by our actions.
Fantastic. What a wonderful place to leave it. Ben, thank you so much for joining me. And I encourage people to go and check out everything that Matt Costa was doing and go and take part if you can.
Well, thanks, Chris, and thanks again for giving me the opportunity to tell your listeners and others about what it is we do and about the incredible people we work with. And I hope the edit's not going to be too difficult.
Oh, don't worry. I'll be all over it. Fantastic.
Great.
Ben, have a lovely day. We'll speak to you soon.
Thanks, Chris.
And that's a wrap on today's episode. A big thanks again to Ben for coming on the show and sharing those incredible stories with us. And of course, thanks to you all for listening and supporting the podcast as well. You can find out more information about Ben or his work in the show notes or over on their website, pcm-erw.com. If you'd like to connect with us, you can find us on our socials. We are No Ordinary Monday Podcast on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and also on YouTube, where you can find full video versions of these conversations with lots of little clips and images cut into the episode as well. And for anything else, check out our website, noordinarymonday.com. Next week on the show, I am joined by adventurer, newly qualified firefighter, producer, photographer, and just all-round superwoman, Ulrika Larsson. One of the many stories that Ulrika relives is when she joined a research expedition in the waters off Djibouti. She was working alongside her husband, Lucas, who is an amazing cinematographer. They were documenting marine scientists aboard a research vessel. But the trip took a darker turn when the boat was boarded by the Coast Guard during a tense moment in the region. What followed was an intense standoff with armed officers on deck and no clear idea how the situation was going to end. It is a great story and I can't wait for you all to hear it. If you enjoyed today's episode, there are 4 simple ways that you can support the show. Number 1, follow or subscribe on your podcast app. Number 2, leave us a quick rating or review. Number 3, share the episode with a friend, a colleague, or maybe a family member. And then number 4, support the show at buymeacoffee.com/noordinarymonday. Any one of these things helps us keep the podcast independent, we avoid adverts, and allows me to keep bringing you great guests and story-driven conversations week after week. And that's it for this week's episode. This podcast is independently produced, hosted, and edited by me, Chris Barron. Thank you so much for listening. Take care, and we'll see you next Monday.